The Meridian Club occupied the 28th floor of Thorn Tower, and on a grey Tuesday in October, the room carried the particular silence that money buys. Hushed conversation, muffled cutlery, the faint strains of a string quartet filtering through speakers hidden somewhere in the mahogany paneling. Victor Thorn had built the tower himself, or rather, he had signed the papers that made other men build it, which in his understanding amounted to the same thing. He sat at his corner table, overlooking the Chicago River, jacket still buttoned, phone face up beside the untouched breadbasket. Across from him sat his son. Jamie was 8 years old. He had not spoken in 3 years. The boy's eyes moved slowly around the room, past the gleaming silverware, past the white-gloved waitstaff, past a table near the window where a mother was cutting her daughter's chicken into pieces and laughing at something the girl had said. Jamie watched them for a long moment. Then he looked down at his hands. "The Kellerman acquisition closes Friday," Victor said, scrolling through his phone with one thumb. "Your trust structure will need to be revised when that happens. I've spoken with the attorneys." He glanced up. "Are you listening?" Jamie looked at him. His expression was careful, the look of a child who had learned to communicate in the language of stillness. "Good." Victor returned to his phone. "I want you to understand these things. Someday they'll matter to you." The waiter materialized at the table's edge, and Victor ordered without looking up. Salmon for Jamie. The boy's nutritionist had specified lean proteins on therapy days, filet for himself, rare with the truffle accompaniment, still water for both. 3 years ago, a car had run a red light on Michigan Avenue, and Victor's wife had died in the passenger seat, and Jamie had sat in the back and witnessed something a child should never witness, and since that afternoon he had not made a single sound. Not a word, not a cry. The best specialists in Chicago had examined him. Victor had flown in others from Boston and Houston and London. Trauma-induced mutism, they said. The neural pathways weren't damaged. The capacity was there. The door was simply locked from the inside, and no one yet had found the key. Victor paid for every treatment without hesitation. He would have paid anything. He simply did not know how to reach for his son across the distance that grief had built between them, so instead he sat across from him at restaurants and spoke about trust funds because it was the only language he had left. He didn't notice the commotion near the entrance until it was already too close to ignore. The maitre d's voice had risen, an event as rare in the Meridian Club as a power outage. "Young lady, this is a private establishment. You cannot security, please." Victor looked up. She was maybe 10 or 11 years old, slight and sure-footed, weaving between tables with the calm of someone who had decided before she walked in that she wouldn't be afraid. Her sneakers were worn through at one toe. Her jacket was 2 sizes too large and had belonged, clearly, to someone else first. Her hair was dark and braided back neatly, but the braid was coming loose at the end, and she hadn't bothered to fix it. She moved like she had a direction and no interest in detours. She was walking straight toward Victor's table. Jamie's hand touched the sleeve of Victor's jacket, a rare thing, Jamie initiating contact, and when Victor looked at his son, the boy's eyes were wide and locked on the girl approaching them. 2 men in dark uniforms were closing from across the room. Victor raised one hand, the gesture precise and automatic, and they stopped. The girl halted at the edge of the table. She looked first at Jamie, then at Victor. The expression on her face was not fear. It was not the practiced performance of a child who had rehearsed something desperate. It was simply attention, the kind that makes a person feel seen in a way that is not entirely comfortable. "Let me sit with your son," she said. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." She paused. "And if you could get me something to eat, I haven't eaten since yesterday." The room around them had gone quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of money, but the alert quiet of people who have stopped pretending not to watch. Victor set his phone down on the tablecloth. He looked at this girl, her worn-out shoes, her oversized jacket, the dignity she carried in a dining room that had never been meant for her, and something about her stillness made him uneasy in a way he could not quite name. "That's quite a proposition," he said, and his voice had the edge he used in boardrooms, the one that ended things. "My son has been treated by the finest specialists on 3 continents. You're 11 years old, and your shoes have holes in them. What exactly are you offering?" "I can help him speak," the girl said. Victor stared at her for a moment, Then he laughed, a short, clean sound, the kind of laugh that isn't really about amusement. "Get her out of here," he said to the security men, "and call the building manager. I want to know how she got past the lobby." The men moved forward. One of them took the girl gently but firmly by the arm. She didn't pull away. She looked at Jamie, and her expression shifted, something specific passing across her face, like recognition, though they had never met. "It starts as warmth," she said quietly, "like when a limb falls asleep and then wakes up. That's how it starts." Then she was being guided away through the dining room, and other diners were carefully redirecting their eyes back to their plates, and the maître d' was murmuring apologies in Victor's direction, and Victor was already reaching for his phone again. "Dad." The word was barely a sound. It was less than a word. It was a breath shaped like one, the ghost of a syllable, more feeling than voice, but it was unmistakable. Victor's hand froze over his phone. He turned. Jamie was staring at his own throat, both palms pressed flat against the table, eyes enormous with an expression Victor had never seen on his son's face before. Wonder, pure and unfeuctured wonder. "Jamie." Victor's voice came out different than he intended. Stripped of the boardroom, stripped of everything. "What?" The boy opened his mouth. Nothing came out, but something was working in his face, something shifting and reaching, like a person testing weight on ice that might hold. Victor was already out of his chair. He pushed through the dining room without his jacket, leaving money folded over the breadbasket. The elevator took too long. He took the stairs, 28 floors, and he didn't register them. She was on the sidewalk when he burst through the lobby doors, walking south on Wacker Drive in the first gray drizzle of the afternoon. She walked quickly for someone her size. "Wait," Victor called. "Stop, please." The girl turned. Rain was starting to spot her jacket darker blue. "He made a sound," Victor said. He was slightly out of breath, which had never happened to him before at the end of a staircase. "My son," he made a sound. "He hasn't made a sound in 3 years." The girl looked at him steadily. "I know." "How? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything." She said it without deflection, like a fact. "I just sat near him. Sometimes that's enough to remind someone that their voice is still there." A cab splashed past. The rain was picking up. Victor looked at this girl standing on a Tuesday sidewalk in the rain who had walked into the most exclusive private club in Chicago to ask a stranger for 5 minutes and a meal. And for a moment his capacity for analysis, which was the thing he trusted most in himself, failed him entirely. "Please," he said. The word felt foreign on his lips. "Come back upstairs. Finish what you started." She studied him the way a person studies a door before deciding whether to open it. "Only if I can bring my mom," she said. "And only if you get us lunch first. Real lunch." She missed breakfast too. He fed them at a diner on the ground floor of the adjacent building. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, which the girl ordered without embarrassment and ate with the focused attention of someone who meant business. Her mother arrived 15 minutes later, a woman in her early 30s, with shadows beneath her eyes and a winter coat that had seen too many seasons. Her name was Colette Renner. Victor didn't recognize it. He wouldn't have. He had never learned the names of the 312 residents displaced when Thorn Development demolished the Lakeview Commons apartment complex 4 years ago. He had approved the acquisition on a Thursday afternoon. By Monday, the eviction notices had gone out. Colette had been living in apartment 4C with her daughter, then 7, working as a paralegal at a tenant rights organization that had been actively fighting the demolition. 2 weeks after the eviction order, the organization lost its primary funding, a grant that had come, Colette later learned, through a foundation with indirect ties to Thorn Capital. The timing had not been a coincidence. Victor learned all of this gradually, over the following days, in increments that felt less like revelation and more like slow submersion. But that first afternoon, he knew none of it. He watched the girl, Phoebe, her mother called her, "Phoebe, slow down, you'll burn your tongue," finish her soup with methodical efficiency, then look up at him with that level gaze and say, "Ready?" They went back upstairs. Victor had arranged for the private dining room, no other guests, no hovering staff. Jamie sat, where Victor had left him, a glass of untouched water in front of him, and when Phoebe walked in, he straightened the way a person straightens when someone enters the room they have been waiting for without knowing it. Phoebe sat beside him, not across, beside, close enough that their elbows nearly touched. "Hi," she said. "I'm Phoebe." Jamie looked at her, his mouth moved, no sound came. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to talk, I'll just sit here." Victor stood near the door. Colette stood on the other side of the room with her arms folded. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Phoebe didn't touch Jamie. She didn't perform any gesture he could have described afterward. She simply sat beside the boy in a quality of quiet that was different from Jamie's quiet. Warmer, less like an absence and more like a presence. She hummed something low under her breath, barely audible. A fragment of something Victor didn't recognize. Then Jamie's mouth opened, and from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound came out. It wasn't a word, it was just a sound, low and rough, like something breaking open after too long sealed, but it filled the room. Victor pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. Colette turned toward the window. Phoebe smiled at Jamie, unhurried, like this was exactly what she'd expected. "There you are," she said softly. Victor found the shelter 3 days later, Hope House, on the south side, a converted elementary school serving families in transitional housing. His assistant relayed the background research with the careful tone she used when delivering information she expected him to receive badly. Colette Renner, formerly of 4C Lakeview Commons, previously employed by a tenant rights organization that had been actively opposing Thorn Development's residential acquisitions. The funding connection, the timing. Victor sat with it for a long moment. Then he drove to Hope House himself, without a driver. Colette arrived in the common room still wearing her coat, bag over her shoulder. She'd come straight from the part-time bookkeeping gig that was one of 3 jobs she'd to keep them on the shelter's path toward an apartment by spring. She stopped when she saw him. She knew who he was. His face had been on the side of a construction hoarding for 4 years. "Mr. Thorne," she said, and the way she said his name was not a greeting. "Mrs. Renner, I wanted to thank you." "You want access to my daughter," she said. "Don't package it as something else." The words landed squarely. Victor, who had not been interrupted in recent memory, said nothing. "Do you know where we lived before here?" She didn't sit. She stood with her arms at her sides, composed in the way of someone who has had to practice composure. "Apartment 4C, Lakeview Commons, 6 years. My daughter grew up in that building. She learned to ride a bike in that courtyard." A pause. "Your company knocked it down. Studio starting at $4,000 a month." Victor was quiet. "I had 30 days notice. I had a 7-year-old in 30 days and a job that disappeared at almost the same time." Her voice stayed level. "I know that wasn't an accident." The common room was very still. Phoebe had stopped pretending to do her homework. "I didn't make that decision individually," Victor said. Because it was true, and because it was also the most useless thing he had ever said. "I know," Colette said. "You made it generally. You built a culture where people like us are a line item." She looked at him with eyes that weren't angry anymore, just tired in the specific way of someone who has been angry long enough that it has composted into something denser. "So yes, I'm aware your son has been suffering. I'm aware my daughter has a gift she didn't ask for and doesn't fully understand. And I know you came here because you want her to keep helping him." She glanced at Phoebe. "What I don't know yet is whether you're capable of becoming the kind of man who deserves that." Victor had been in rooms with harder people. Senators, hedge fund adversaries, union negotiators who arrived with years of grievance prepared like artillery. He had never felt as thoroughly stripped of his defenses as he did in this South Side common room in front of a woman in a damp coat. "I don't know either," he said. It wasn't what he'd planned to say. It surprised him. Colette looked at him for a long moment. "Come back tomorrow," she said finally, "with paperwork. If my daughter decides she wants to continue helping your son, it happens on our terms. Private, confidential. No doctors studying her, no press, no foundation with her photo on the brochure. When it's done, we're left alone." He came back with an attorney. Colette's choice, a public interest lawyer, who spent 20 minutes reading the agreement with the expression of someone making sure it said exactly what it said. It did. Victor had been careful about that, though being careful felt like the very least he owed. Phoebe came to see Jamie every morning for 2 weeks. They met at a library 2 blocks from Hope House, in a reading room with windows that faced a park. Victor sat near the door. Colette sat across the room with a book. Phoebe and Jamie worked at a table covered in picture books and colored pencils, because Phoebe had determined early that Jamie communicated best when his hands were occupied. The first week, his progress arrived and receded like a tide, each wave going slightly farther than the last. He produced sounds, first breath sounds, then vowel shapes, then something approaching consonants. On the 8th morning he said no, clearly in response to Phoebe asking if he wanted the red pencil, and Phoebe said good, and Jamie sat very still as if he had surprised himself. Victor wept in the parking lot that day. He sat in his car for 20 minutes, with his hands over his face, which he had not done since the afternoon of the accident. It was not comfortable. It was necessary. On the 12th day, Jamie said Phoebe. On the 14th, he said Dad, look, and pointed at something funny in a picture book, a small observation about a rabbit and a hat, and his voice, though thin and unpracticed, was unmistakably his voice, the same one Victor had not heard in 3 years, and it broke Victor open in precisely the place he had been holding himself most carefully closed. In the days that followed, Victor began to do something he had not done in 20 years of development work. He looked at the spreadsheets differently. He had always known, abstractly, that his projects displaced residents. He had never converted that abstraction into specifics. Now, without any particular plan, he asked his research team to pull the records from the last decade's residential acquisitions. The number of displaced families was larger than he had allowed himself to know. He didn't announce a transformation. He didn't hire a communications team to help him manage a narrative about growth and change, which had been his first instinct. Instead, he called a meeting with his general counsel and asked what it would take to establish a genuine relocation assistance fund. Not a gesture, not a tax vehicle, but a fund that actually replaced what families had lost. His counsel looked at him for a long moment. Then she named a number. Victor signed the authorization. He did not tell Colette this right away. He was not sure yet whether he was doing it for the right reason or because he needed to feel less like what she had seen when she looked at him. He suspected the distinction mattered. One Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the Meridian Club, Victor arrived at the library to find only Colette there. Phoebe and Jamie had gone to the park across the street. Through the window, Victor could see them at the edge of the sandbox. Phoebe talking, her hands moving in some explanation, Jamie watching her with the absorbed attention of a person for whom listening is still new again. He asked her this morning why she does it, Colette said, not looking up from her book. Helps people. Victor waited. She told him it's like how some people are good at math and some at drawing. She's good at finding where someone's voice went and sitting near it until it remembers the way back. Colette turned a page. I'm not sure she's wrong. Victor sat down across from her. It was the first time they'd been in the same room without the buffer of an agenda. I looked at the Lakeview file, he said. I know what the demolition took from you, your job, your home, the legal filing you'd been building for 2 years. He paused. I know the funding loss wasn't coincidental. Colette was quiet. I can't undo it. I've thought about what I could say that would matter, and I don't think there's a sentence. He looked at his hands. But I've authorized a relocation fund. Real money, not a PR move, he met her eyes. It doesn't make us even. I'm not trying to make us even. I'm trying to do the next thing correctly. Colette closed her book. She looked out the window at the park, where Phoebe had apparently said something that made Jamie laugh. A sound so unpracticed and genuine that it carried faintly through the glass. My daughter asked me last night if she thought you were a good man, she said. What did you tell her? I told her I wasn't sure yet, but that the question was the right one to keep asking. She looked at him steadily. She said she thought you were trying to become one. She said that's actually harder. Victor didn't answer. Outside, Jamie was telling Phoebe, something with his hands and his newly recovered voice, the words too distant to make out. Phoebe watched him with the same steady attention she gave everything. It was the middle of December when Jamie spoke his first full sentence. Victor had picked him up from school, a thing he'd started doing twice a week, rearranging his calendar in the deliberate, slightly awkward way of a person learning a new habit. And they were driving home when Jamie, looking out at the Christmas lights strung along Michigan Avenue, said, "I didn't think it would feel different, talking, but it does. It feels like something I forgot was there." Victor kept both hands on the wheel. "Does it feel better?" he asked very carefully. "Yeah." Jamie considered the window for a moment. "I think I was quiet for so long because I was scared if I talked, things would be more real. Like what happened to Mom would be more real." The traffic light ahead went red. Victor stopped the car. "And now," he said. Jamie thought about this with the gravity of an 8-year-old in possession of a serious idea. "Now I think it's the other way. Like, the more real it is, the less it's only mine to carry." Victor sat at the red light for a moment after it turned green. The driver behind him tapped a horn gently. Victor pulled forward. "That's one of the wisest things I've ever heard," he said. "Phoebe told me something like it," Jamie admitted. "That sounds about right." On the last Saturday before Christmas, the four of them met in the park. At Phoebe's suggestion, relayed through a text from Colette that arrived with a raised eyebrow emoji. Victor was learning to read as something close to approval. The park was cold and bright, one of those Chicago winter days when the sky is so blue it seems almost aggressive and the lake throws diamonds of light at anything willing to receive them. Jamie ran ahead toward the frozen fountain and then stopped himself, briefly self-conscious. He still moved with the slight hesitation of someone relearning that a body is not just a container for silence. But Phoebe was already ahead of him, announcing loudly that she had never successfully crossed ice without falling and intended to do so at least twice today, and Jamie's self-consciousness dissolved into the cooperative project of two children agreeing to be bad at something together. Victor stood with Colette near the path. The quiet between them had changed gradually from the wary kind into something more like shared attention. Colette had agreed to oversee the community relations component of the relocation fund. Not because she trusted Victor completely, she'd been clear about that, but because she knew the work from the inside, and she knew that funds like this went sideways fastest when led by people who didn't. "She told me something last week," Colette said, watching her daughter pick her way carefully along the ice. "She said helping Jamie wasn't just about his voice. She said the voices that go quiet are usually protecting something, and the only way back is through the thing they're protecting." Victor thought about his son in the car. The more real it is, the less it's only mine to carry. "She's not wrong," he said. Phoebe fell, once spectacularly, pulling Jamie down with her, both of them landing in a heap of jackets and laughter. Jamie's laugh was still getting used to itself, slightly uneven, like a song someone is remembering by ear. It was the most complete sound Victor had heard in 4 years. Colette shook her head slowly. She did that on purpose. She thought it would make him less scared to fall. Did it work? Colette watched Jamie pull himself up, dust himself off, and reach down to help Phoebe. "You tell me." Victor didn't answer, because there was nothing to add to what was right in front of him. Two children helping each other up on a cold December morning in Chicago, completely ordinary, completely improbable, the kind of moment that doesn't announce itself as a miracle while it's happening. Only later, when you're alone and it comes back to you, do you realize something has been quietly changed at the root? The questions with no answers he had made his peace with slowly. He did not know why Phoebe could do what she did. He did not know whether it was faith or biology, or something that simply hadn't been named yet, and he had stopped needing to know. Some certainties that once seemed necessary turned out, on examination, to be optional. What he knew was this: his son was speaking, the fund was open, and on the south side of Chicago, a family that had been made to disappear was still here. Sometimes the most important thing a person with power can do is use it to clear space for someone else, and then get out of the way. Jamie had told him that, more or less. 8 years old, still learning the shape of his own voice, already carrying more wisdom than he knew. Victor was learning too. He figured quietly that was probably the point.